Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's about 6:03. I think we should go ahead and get started. Good evening, everybody. Welcome. This is Grand County Countywide Town Hall, first Zoom video virtual town hall countywide ever, I believe. I'm Commissioner Richard Cimino from District 1. I thank you for joining us for this town hall tonight to talk about everyone's favorite topic, government budgeting. It can be dry, but it's very important, and we're glad that you're taking the time to be with us tonight. We are facing a potential $1.4 million shortfall annually in property tax revenue collected beginning in 2022. This is what's set in motion right now because of things like the Gallagher Amendment, and it's in the Constitution, and we are holding this town hall to inform the public about how you have the opportunity to decide if this mechanism stays in place or if there's some changes made to basically keep things the way they are and we don't have this shortfall befall us. We do in the Grand County run a very lean government. I released an article several months ago talking about manpower the last 14 years, and it's been relatively flat. So therefore, we really can't trim our way out of this kind of a shortfall if everything happens as is in motion right now. To be $1.4 million short year after year would require potentially significant reduction in various services. So we want to describe this for you tonight, let you understand what's at play. We've been working through various solutions, and tonight's town hall gives us a chance to share our perspectives on the issues, discuss the proposed plan and what the ballot questions are that you will see this November, and get a chance to hear from all of you. There'll be some question and answer at the end. But before we get started, we've joined up Grand County with a company called TurnCore, and Sarah is with TurnCore, and she's going to run through some logistics here tonight for all of you so you can be familiar with this platform.
Thanks, Commissioner, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I see people are still joining, so that's great. For those of you who have joined a Zoom meeting before, this might look a little different. This is we are broadcasting live from each of our homes. And so while you can see each of the panelists on screen, we can't see you. We can see your names, and many of them are familiar. So thanks again for joining. Tonight we'll be relying on the Q&A panel. That's also something different. So down at the bottom of the screen, you'll see a little icon that says Q&A. We have set aside at least 20 minutes, perhaps more, at the end of tonight's session for Q&A. So as questions come up, feel free to submit them through the Q&A panel. We've got some staff behind the scenes working to organize them so that when we get to that Q&A section, we'll be efficient, and hopefully that means get to as many of your questions as we can. If we can't get to all the questions tonight, we have a web page set up on the county site with a frequently asked questions section. I'm going to do a quick flash of that just to give you a kind of visual cue. So you should all see this here. I don't expect you to read it, but this is the URL at the top. And after tonight's town hall, we will both be putting the recording of the video tonight here, and we will address any additional questions that we weren't able to get to. And any questions that you ask and that we feel other constituents would want to know. So be sure to visit that site because it will be updated. You know, we know this is a busy time of year for everybody, and while of course we would love to have several hundred people on here tonight, we know that not everybody can make it. So we would really appreciate you sharing the recording of this town hall with your neighbors, friends, and family after the fact. We will be playing a video, we will be playing some audio, because we're all broadcasting from home and you all are watching from home or various places, sometimes it can be a little glitchy based on our internet connection and what's going on there. So I thank you for your patience in advance, and just know that all these resources do live online in case we get into a situation where it's not quite the quality we'd hope for you tonight. So I think that covers it all. I'm going to turn my video off so that we can focus on tonight's panelists, and I'm going to turn it back to Commissioner Cimino to introduce our special guest.
Thank you, Sarah. We have invited a special guest here tonight to help facilitate this discussion and to share the statewide point of view. I'd like to introduce State Senator Bob Rankin. He represents Colorado Senate District 8 which includes Grand, Garfield, Jackson, Moffett, Rio Blanco, Routt, and Summit counties. And the full-time population of Senate District 8 is about 150,000 people. Bob has served for many years on the Legislative Joint Budget Committee, and he still serves on that budget committee, so he knows the budget inside and out, and he's also worked on Gallagher in depth for several years. So Senator Rankin, thank you for joining us tonight.
Well, yeah, thank you, Commissioner. It's a real honor to be with you. I really don't feel like I'm a special guest. I'm your senator, and I want to be very involved with you day to day. I just want to take a minute before we get started to thank all our firefighters and public safety folks all over Northwest Colorado who are really out there tonight. You know, we got so many terrible fires going on, and you know, those folks are really working hard, so we need to remember them. So I'm really honored to be with you. This is an important discussion, one I've been involved with for about 4 or 5 years now, because it affects rural Colorado so dramatically in our counties and all our special districts. So I really applaud you for getting, you know, for taking this opportunity to inform your voters, our voters, about Gallagher and the budget challenges. We have some really potentially difficult budget years coming because of loss of revenue, and this Gallagher amendment further complicates that. So, you know, the more we can inform each other about it and look at potential outcomes, the better off we are. We know that, you know, government works best the closest to the people that we can get it, and your inputs to our commissioners and to your state legislators really do affect the priorities of spending. And the priorities of spending really are what government's, you know, my experience on the budget committee, that's really what it's all about. So we really applaud and thank you all for joining us to do that. So with that, you know, let's take a look at the agenda. Sarah, if we have that available, we can kind of look at what we're going to accomplish. We're going to, you know, Commissioner Chimino is going to do the heavy lifting. He's going to explain Gallagher to all of us, which very few people in the state can actually do, I'm confident in. But we have a video to help him do that. So he will be one of our principal speakers, and then we'll go through the other county commissioners, and then we'll have a Q&A session. So the commissioners are going to sort of take turns with Commissioner Chimino first, and then Merritt Linke, Commissioner District 2, is going to talk about the potential fiscal impacts or the potential budget impacts that we are trying to mitigate. And then Kristen Manguso, our Commissioner for District 3, is going to talk about what that means to individual residents. And then Brent Shutlin, our county sheriff, who won't be with us because he's out handling the Williams Fork fire issues, has a video for us. And then I'm going to come back and talk a little bit about how we've looked at this from the state level, because we're going to tell you over the course of the evening that we have a state solution, which the legislatures, put on the ballot for November, but you're also going to be able to vote on county initiatives. So you'll have two choices, and you need to understand the interaction between those, and we all do, because we have two potential solutions. If we don't do one or the other of them, we will have a problem. So we will talk about that. So with that, Sarah, I think we can proceed to, we have a short video for you that's produced specifically for Grant County to explain potentially what the impacts are, but more importantly, how does this all work?
Okay, thank you, Senator. I'm going to queue up this video here. Give me just 1 second and we'll get it going.
And thank you, Sarah. Terrific job in putting this whole thing together.
Okay, okay, here's the video. Stand by.
Local governments across Colorado are being hampered by drops in funding because of a provision in Colorado's Constitution. A provision that means that housing growth in the Front Range forces rural Colorado to do with less. This includes budget restrictions for road funding, public safety, and emergency medical services in other areas of Colorado, particularly the areas whose property tax base consists mostly of housing property, like Grand County, which is 63% residential. That provision is the Gallagher Amendment. In 1982, voters passed the Gallagher Amendment to the Constitution that changed the way homes were appraised, and it also required that the amount of property taxes collected from homes statewide could never account for more than roughly 45% of total property tax collections statewide. The amendment means that the remaining 55% of property taxes must come from non-residential property, like businesses and agricultural property. Gallagher also dictates the assessment rate for all property. What's the assessment rate? It's the percentage of a property's value that is subject to taxation. You don't pay taxes on the entire value of your home, only a portion of it. For example, if you have a $400,000 home and the assessment rate is 7.15%, you only pay property taxes on $28,600 of the home's value. That assessed value is multiplied by the locally approved mill levy. In Grand County, about 1/3 of the assessed mills fund the school district. A quarter of the mills fund Grand County for services such as road maintenance and public safety, and the remainder funds towns and special districts, like fire protection districts. Gallagher set the assessment rate on most non-residential property at 29%. That 29% rate means that the assessment rate for residential property must fluctuate to maintain the roughly 45-55 ratio. When Gallagher was added to the Constitution, the residential assessment rate was 21%. Throughout the 1980s, the growth in value of residential property outpaced increases in non-residential property values. With ever-rising residential property values, the assessment rate on homes had to be lowered to avoid residential property from bearing more than that 45% ratio. The assessment rate on homes fell to 18%, then 16%, then 15%. It hit 10.36% in 1995, then it fell to 7.96% in 2003. In 2017, it dropped to 7.2%. Then in 2019, it fell again to 7.15%, all the while increasing the disproportionate tax burden on commercial properties. The automatic rate drops hurt different parts of Colorado differently. Areas of Colorado that have a lot of non-residential property weren't impacted by the drop in the rate on homes as much as areas of the state, such as Grand County, with a property tax base consisting mostly of residential property. Grand County hasn't raised its mill levy since 2003, when the assessment rate on home property was 7.96%. That assessment rate is now 7.15%. The drops in the residential assessment rate means that the voter-approved mills are worth less. As county commissioners, we pride ourselves on running a lean and efficient government, despite increased costs due to tourism, population growth, and inflation. The reductions in the assessment rate caused by Gallagher make it hard to maintain even basic county services. And the problem will get harder in the coming years. Because residential property value increases continue to outpace non-residential value growth statewide, Gallagher will cause more drops in the residential rate in the future. In 2021, the rate is set to drop to 5.88%. That's nearly an 18% drop in the rate. That's why there has been a bunch of Gallagher-related issues on the ballots of Grand County residents over the last 2 years. Last year, for instance, 3 different fire protection districts serving Grand County all saw their voters successfully approve a de-Gallagherizing measure. Colorado's Constitution requires that each district vote separately on issues like this. So while voters may have de-Gallagherized their fire protection districts, Grand County is still subject to Gallagher's automatic reductions. This November, some residents in Grand County might have 3 or 4 different Gallagher-related questions on their ballot. Their town, county, and fire district might all be asking permission to de-Gallagherize. And it gets even more complicated. There is also a statewide Gallagher question on the 2020 ballot. The statewide resolution asks Coloradans to repeal the Gallagher Amendment so that the residential assessment rate doesn't fall in the future. If the statewide Gallagher repeal passes, the 7.15% rate on homes still can't be raised without voter approval because of Tabor. This November, Grand County residents will have the option to consider and express their opinion on this issue without waiting for the rest of the state to address it. If approved by the voters, Grand County's ballot measure would allow the mills to float up only enough to offset the revenue reductions from the next drop in the residential assessment rate. This would stabilize Grand County's budget without collecting more taxes. This educational video was written and produced by the Colorado Fiscal Institute in collaboration with Grand County.
So thank you for putting that together. I'm sure it's all very clear to everybody at this point, and that's sort of a joke. This is a kind of a complicated issue. And that video will be available online, I'm sure, to go through at your leisure. There's also a good video done by Building Better Colorado, which I think we will make available to everyone. But we will try to walk through some of those implications. And so I'll introduce Commissioner Chimino with great expectations.
Thank you, Senator Rankin. So yes, the video described the 45-55% split between residential and non-residential. We are projecting a residential rate assessment reduction from 7.15 to 5.88. And what this means is that you might see a $17 reduction in property taxes paid by residential property owners per $100,000 of house value. If the voters, as the video said, gives the local government's permission to de-Gallagherize, then your taxes that you pay for residential property owners should stay the same. A lot of rural counties find themselves in this predicament because we have a vast majority of residential properties, not a lot of commercial. And a lot of counties on the Front Range or big cities, they have a lot of commercial properties, so it's not as severe an impact to them. But for more about our budget impact, I'm going to turn it over to Commissioner Linke.
Thank you, Commissioner Chimino, and thank you all for being on the call tonight. So we do strive to always run a lean and efficient budget, and we are going to be making some cuts, but this is a severe deficit and it could impact our essential services that we've all come to count on, especially because we are going to continue to see an increase in demand. We're going to be reviewing the 2021 budget in the upcoming months, as we do every year this time of year. And we don't want to cut essential services that are critical for Grand County, but we are projecting a $2.5 million deficit, which is basically 5% across all departments. And sometimes that's really tough for some departments to come up with that 5%. It's hard to do. We do want to make sure our citizens understand this situation. That's the reasoning behind this program tonight and the videos that Senator Rankin referred to that are available to educate people regarding Gallagher. It is a situation that lots of other local government finds itself in, and so you may see some other entities asking the same type of question on the ballot as we are. We can't speak for them, but we do want to help everyone understand this budget picture. There is also going to be a statewide question, Gallagher question on the ballot. And it is a bipartisan bill that the legislature has got a lot of Republican support because many rural communities like Grand and unlike the Front Range have more residential properties and a lot less commercial properties, just like we do here. So we're going to need to look at a local fix where we'll know the end result, something that we can control here. I'm going to pass this on to Commissioner Manguso to address how local de-Gallagerization might work. Thank you.
So at Grand County, we have looked at many alternatives. We are looking at other ways to deal with budget deficit, but you know, we don't like to ask anybody to give up a future cut in property taxes. We'd all love to see our taxes cut. I would as well. But there is a certain point where with the reduction in the residential property tax, it is going to cut into services that might matter more to citizens, to you, than the $17 per $100,000 on residential taxes. That's what we're here for tonight. So if the voters approve de-Gallagherization, it would keep residential property taxes collected by the county the same as what we collected in 2020 this year. It'll help maintain services. So to make up for the cut created by the state mechanism, which is Gallagher, if the voters approve this measure, it would allow us, Grand County, to float up the mills just enough so it would even that dollar amount each and every year. So it would stabilize our budget from here forward, and the county would not have to count on any type of a statewide fix. We would be controlling our own destiny here in Grand County. So this has already been said, you guys, you've heard it. It's about $17 per $100,000 in residential home value. So it'd be about $70 on a $400,000 home per year. But that would not be additional money. That's money actually that you just would not drop. So if there is not de-Gallagherization, the state mechanism will cause this to drop. It will go down. And in the future, the county would likely have to consider budget cuts. So we did invite Sheriff Shortland to join us, but I think you heard Senator Rankin already say that he has a video, so I will pass it back to Senator Rankin or Sarah, and they can show that video. Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight.
All right, thank you. I will queue up the audio message from the sheriff. Give me just 1 second here. And here we go.
Good evening, Grand County. This is Brett Shortland, your Grand County Sheriff. Thanks for inviting me to participate tonight. Unfortunately, due to the effects of the Williams Fork fire, I'm unable to join you personally, but wanted to make sure that I had a chance to speak with you. So please accept this message in lieu of my presence, and I'm happy to always answer any questions that you folks have. I'm here to provide a local perspective on the very real and tangible impacts of Gallagher and what happens as the residential rate continues to drop. Because the county is always modifying their budget due to financial strains, as a department head and elected official, I'm continuously asked to cut my budget as well. That's expected in times like this, and that affects our ability to serve the community. My job as your sheriff is to ensure that public safety 24/7, 365 days a year is provided to all of our citizens, tourists, and anyone else that passes through our county for any given reason. Given these increases in tourism and visitation, I'm seeing an increase in demand for services, but we also continue to operate on tighter and tighter budgets with a minimal amount of personnel. A good example of this is in 2007, which is where our statistics go back to, the Sheriff's Office responded to approximately 2,700 calls for service. Currently in 2019, we responded to over 15,500 calls for service, and we're trending currently for 2020 at 16,000 calls for service. We've also had a decrease in our resources. Our grant funds are dwindling as everyone else fights for the solid dollar, and that affects training, response times, and other variations of the law enforcement world. Personnel and competitive pay to recruit and retain individuals is another factor in providing these essential services. There are police officer and deputy vacancies all across our county, state, and region, including all across the country. A lot of times often due to some of the recent interactions between the community and law enforcement. This makes it extremely difficult for our community to recruit and mostly retain our law enforcement officers. We really want these officers to be engaged in our community, be a member of our community. However, during these times, it's tough for that to happen. I ask for your support of this, and please do listen to what all the speakers are saying tonight, as I think that really emphasizes the need that Grand County is in right now. We cannot continue down this pathway that we're heading, and I think with your support of this will give us an opportunity to provide the very best possible public safety and other county services to our community. Thank you, and I'll pass it back to whoever is next here.
All right, Senator, I think it's back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Well, just to back up a little bit on this issue, we're talking about county budgets and they're dramatically impacted, but remember that a large part of your property taxes go towards schools. There will be a $500 million impact statewide to K-12 budgets. And I really, at this point, don't know where we would find the money to backfill that. And starting in 22, there are also there are literally thousands of special districts throughout the state. And when we looked at this before, we had fire districts out selling fire trucks, because they just did not know how they could maintain their budgets. So this came up for me back in 17, and in the summer of 18, I asked for and participated in a special interim session during the summer. And that's where this recommendation, we didn't get it done until this year, to get the legislature to approve what's called a referred measure to the ballot. During those hearings, I always like to tell the story that Senator Gallagher himself, this happened in 82, and Senator Gallagher is still around, and he came and testified. And I asked him, I said, Senator Gallagher, in 1982, did you talk about the impact on rural Colorado versus what it would do for homeowners in urban Colorado? And he said, no, but we should have. And this is an issue that really affects thousands of districts and counties and counties in rural Colorado. So we've been trying to find a state level solution for it, because it's difficult for every county and every special district, and you're going to see those measures on your ballot. Our firefighters don't need to be worried about right now running a special election. It's expensive and it's troublesome to go out and convince people to vote for it. I recommend you vote for every last one of them. But at the state level, I've been leading the effort to try to solve this problem by repealing Gallagher, which would literally just freeze that rural assessment rate and commercial assessment rate where it is. So it wouldn't continue to go down. And then the county commissioners would, if you wanted to raise taxes, you would still have to go to the voters. So this does not defeat Tabor. You would still have to go to the voters for any increase in taxes. There's nothing in any of these measures that actually increases anybody's taxes. It literally freezes them where they are so we could have some stability in budgeting. Now, what happens if they both pass? Well, that just would refer it back to the commissioners. I mean, we need to vote for all of these measures in order to protect our local budgets. But if we do vote for them, they're not inconsistent. It would still work. So I just feel it's so important to resolve this problem. And, that issue of K-12 funding, which we don't, since the commissioners don't really control that budget, we don't often talk about K-12 in this forum. We talk about it in a lot of other forums. But we literally are facing a decreased revenue because of the economic impact of COVID. So we will not have the money to backfill those budgets. So think about it, not just for the county, and this is my plea, but in terms of K-12 budgets and special district budgets as well. We have a good bit of time left for questions, and we can really get into some of these things that are difficult to understand. And Commissioner Cimino is an expert at explaining it all. So let's proceed with that rather than, having me give my Gallagher lecture over and over. So thank you for being involved. Let's see what we haven't explained.
All right, well, we get those questions in. Commissioners, is there anything else you want to add based on the remarks so far?
No, I believe we should open it up for questions.
Yeah.
Well, I see that we have here a question for Senator Cimino. It says, since Gallagher amendment depends on residential value and values keep going up, if the county de-Gallagherizes, what happens if home values go down? What happens to our taxes? Good question.
Thank you for that question. And yeah, we have mills. Mills are applied to the property value. So when property values do go up, government entities, county government, town government, special districts that get property tax revenue, when property values go up, those property tax revenues go up. We just got done with the 2008, 2009 recession. And during that time in 2010, 2011, 2012, property values went down. When property values go down, the entities that collect property tax revenue collected less revenue. So property values will still go up and down, and it'll have the corresponding effects to budgets that collect property taxes. But what Gallagher is doing is it is adjusting up and down regardless of property actual values. And that's what's very, very frustrating. And that's why the system doesn't work, is that it shifts things, whether you're in a recession or whether you're in an economic boom. And so one thing we've learned is, as I sat through a lot of the meetings with Senator Rankin during the interim committees that happened in 2018, is there's a big consensus that public policy by formula does not work. It ends up backfiring. And this is a formula, and it's really backfired.
Particularly if it's a statewide formula, Commissioner. I often say that the really big flaw in Gallagher is that the word statewide appears in the Constitution. So the calculation has to be statewide, which prevents us from putting on a regional or local countywide solution. Let's see, we have another question here for this time for Commissioner Manguso. And that has to do with some of our fire districts have already de-Gallagherized, as we're using a term lately. So what does that look like? What have some of those districts done?
Well, the other districts, so Senator Rankin, you're asking what other people have done?
Yes, fire districts specifically.
They have Gallagherized. I know 3 in Grand County already have. I believe Kremling is going to do the same thing, and probably partial hot sulfur. It will be on the ballot this year as well, to do just this, stabilize their revenues so they don't see a drop in their property tax revenues. So this is a common event that's happening, not just here in Grand County, but throughout the state of Colorado.
Well, thank you. Our next question's really interesting because it's how do we propose to communicate this? I did want to make one comment that to some extent simplifies it. This proposal from your county, our county, has been sometimes described as a floating mill levy. That means that no matter what happens in Gallagher, your mill levy will automatically adjust without a Tabor vote. You are voting a Tabor amendment here, which says that mill levies can go up so that tax revenue will remain flat. So that floating mill concept is one that's not too hard to grasp. I mean, it just means that your mill levy will change so that your revenues stay flat. So it's often referred to that way. The first one I was involved with was Colorado Mountain College, which is not in your area, but is in much of my area. And they did a very good job of doing the legal analysis to see if, in fact, they could sort of set, this being a Tabor vote, and prescribed under Tabor, could that mill be prescribed to float to keep up with it? But for going back to Rich, so the question is, how are we going to communicate this? How are we going to convince people? It's so hard to grasp, and it interacts with Tabor. It's a difficult issue. How do you propose to communicate this between now and November?
Thank you, Senator Rankin, and thanks for the question. The way we're going to try to communicate to the public about this is, well, with this town hall. The video that we showed in this town hall is going to be available on the county website for the next few months. So it's available for viewing, and I think that's somewhat useful. We are probably going to lean on the media and really hope that there's some stories in the newspapers that try to describe this. It's also a bit challenging in Colorado with Tabor. our hands are tied in what we can say on ballot questions once the ballot question is finalized. And we are restricted from lobbying and using public dollars to lobby for a ballot measure once the question is finalized. So as we continue talking to people, we're going to finalize this probably August 25th, next Tuesday, next week. And then we're going to be very careful. We could continue talking about it with the public, and we will, but only as information, just answering questions, describing the facts, not lobbying one way or the other or advocating. It's up to the voters. It's their choice, but we'll do our best to try to feed you the information and answer your questions throughout the next couple months. That's about all we have, I guess, unless my fellow commissioners have more to add.
I can add a little bit there. One of the things, and I actually would ask for any of our listeners help with this, is if there's any community service groups, Rotaries and so forth, we'd love to come in and talk in front of those groups. In fact, today I spoke in front of the Granby Rotary and did this presentation, and I spoke in front of the Granby Chamber Board this week earlier too. And those kind of groups, I think, are interested in this, and they're involved, and also they have a good circulation mailing list of a lot of people that can at least circulate this video, which I think is a good start to trying to understand this. So we'd like to have some help for anybody that has groups that we could come and speak to. Thank you.
I will say Building Better Colorado went all over the state over the last 2 years and conducted seminars with community leaders throughout the state. And, you know, they actually took a poll, and it came back like, you know, about 80% of the people said, yeah, we need to do this. But, you know, it's difficult to grasp, and it will take some communication. The simple way to describe it is that it's a complicated mechanism, but it will not raise taxes. It will simply keep taxes at their current level, absent some other action by the county, by local government. So, I mean, it really is just to stabilize the current tax situation, prevent a sort of a bizarre mechanism from causing us great harm in rural Colorado. And it will put the power back in local government to change tax rates. So I think, as you know, we need to have a very simple explanation. We're stabilizing the tax base because of, and there are a lot of things wrong with our budgeting system. Believe me, I'm the senior member of the budget committee. A lot of things wrong with it that we need to unravel. But this is one of them. And the thing we have to do is stabilize the situation. And that's what this does. That's the easy way to describe this. So let's see, we have another question here for Commissioner Linke. Please explain more about the rural and front range difference, very pertinent to the question, and how Gallagher formula impacts the rural inordinately, more so.
The biggest difference there is the rural parts of the state have a high number of residences, residential properties, and the front range and communities have kind of the other way. And so that difference causes, as a statewide, that's the one size fits all kind of thing that doesn't work for the rural communities like us. And that's because of that big difference. 63% of our properties are rural residential properties. And that's why we take that hit when the Gallagher and all those mechanisms come into play, and the residential assessment rate is the one that takes the hit. I guess that's the best way I can explain it.
So again, interesting questions coming in. Thank you. This one says, you don't like asking people to forego a future property tax cut. What sort of essential services are we talking about that is sort of forcing this question? Let's go to Commissioner Manguso on this one.
Well, we don't have anything outlined right now, and we don't. This is just something to stabilize the budget for the future. We are about asking for a $2.5 million budget reduction this year because of COVID, because of things that are happening in the county. So I can't identify specific essential services. that the three of us will have to make or whatever future board. I just don't think that that's an answerable question tonight. I'm sorry.
Well, I think, fire department's the easy one to describe, Commissioner. I mean, they're not county, but, we certainly don't want rural fire departments. I mean, we literally have hundreds of fires in this state every year, and most of them get put out pretty quickly. And if we start cutting back on, the ability of those local, sometimes volunteer fire departments to go put out a little fire, if we're going to have more big fires. So that's the one that we heard the most about when we did this interim committee. That's a serious problem. It couldn't be more evident than this summer. But that issue of, I just wanted to comment, we have some of the lowest property taxes in the nation. We really do. So over time, and Gallagher has been a major impact on this, the property tax contribution to our K-12 school system has dropped from 60% to 40%, and the state has to backfill that. So that is a very, very obvious impact that has happened because of Gallagher. We have another question here. What happens if the state passes, but the county fails, or vice versa? Commissioner Cimino?
Thank you. If the state question passes, quite frankly, in my opinion, all the other special district towns and county questions are moot. They're not necessary. You don't have to float the mill if the state question passes, because if the voters approve statewide to repeal Gallagher, then it's going to freeze residential assessment rates at 7.15. Why won't it ever go up? Because Tabor prevents the legislature from raising taxes. So the only way property taxes can go up in the future is if voters vote higher mills. So if the state question passes, it's not an issue anymore. Now, if the state question fails, then yes, all the counties, towns, and special districts have to de-Gallagherize, or they're going to get this hit. And we know it's coming, whether it's 5.88, that's just an assessment, or whether it's 5.1, and then 2 years later, every 2 years, the statewide assessment happens and the formula is re-looked at. And so this thing could continue going down even below 5.1. And for example, if the voters approve repealing Gallagher in 2022, for example, well, great, we get to lock it in at that lower rate. Say it goes to 5.8 like projected. So this is a one year chance to stop the slide at this level. And so if both questions fail, then yeah, we're in that boat. If the local questions pass, then you're floating the mill, as Senator Rankin described. If the state question passes, there's no floating of the mill. It stopped at 7.15.
But, I want to be very blunt with my rural constituents here. Whether or not this passes at the state level is not a foregone conclusion, because the Front Range in general would, without a lot of education, would not vote to repeal Gallagher, because that's where it started. In 1982, property taxes were going up fast. And, this protected them from ever increasing taxes. And that's still viewed that way because they have, a higher proportion of residential taxes than they do commercial. And so this is not, I'm not sure that we have a strong enough educational campaign for this to pass at the state level. The safety valve is these initiatives at the local level, and we desperately need to pass them in case the state doesn't, the state initiative does not pass, because we will have serious problems. I had a related question here for me. It says the state backfill applies to schools, but not the county. That's right. That's exactly right. Because the state funding formula for schools says that we calculate a per pupil reimbursement to every district. And those vary dramatically depending on the assessed value within a school district. So the state is obligated to bring every school district up to that per pupil funding formula. We have no such obligation to support county budgets. Okay, we've got another good question. What percent of the 3% residential value is vacation type rental property? This is a good question for Grand County. So this residential property rate will definitely affect short-term rentals or rental property in the county. And a lot of those people don't actually vote in Grand County. So it's a good question. Which of you really smart commissioners want to take that, Rich?
Thank you, Senator Rankin. Yeah, I've spoken over the last couple of years about how basically 70% of the residential homes in Grand County are empty. We have 18,000 housing units. That could include a single family house or a condo or an apartment or a townhouse. So 18,000 housing units. Only 5,000 are lived in full-time by full-time residents. We have a population of 15,000 people. It's an average of 3 persons per house. Some have a single person living in a house. Sometimes it's a family of 5. So average 3 people per house, 5,000 full-time. So that means that 13,000 houses are second homes. And they pay the same property taxes. If they do rent their house out, they still pay the residential property tax. They do not pay commercial. That is looked at every year by the legislature. So we'll see if that ever changes. But yeah, so all these homes, they will continue paying their property taxes. And that's why the hit to Grand County would be particularly harsh if the Gallagher stays in place and none of these questions pass. Is all those 18,000 housing units, there'll be quite the reduction. And commercial properties are falling off kind of left and right in Grand County. For example, in the town of Fraser, we had a movie theater and a bowling alley, and it was a commercial property paying, commercial tax paying property, but the recreation district took it over. And when the recreation district takes it over, they don't pay any property taxes anymore. All your school buildings, any building owned by a nonprofit, none of these facilities, none of these buildings pay any taxes, all the churches, all the religious facilities. So the number of commercial taxpayers are just going down and down. The internet is killing brick and mortar commercial owners left and right. It's a really, it's an unfortunate trend that Colorado finds ourselves in. But yeah, that's the residential percentage breakout of full-time residents versus second homeowners.
So yeah, the short-term rental issue has been a really hot issue in Summit County and Grand County, and there has been a lot of discussion that short-term rentals should be paying commercial property taxes, but the impact on tourism and vacationers and so forth, generally it's been resisted by the Chamber of Commerce, at least in terms of raising those rates. They would literally go from 7.15 to 29% of the assessment rate. So it would dramatically increase them. We had an interesting question here. So the difference, I think, one of the commissioners used this $17 per $100,000 of value on a residential property. And I believe that was referring to the difference between the current 7.15 assessment rate and the 5.88. And so the question is, what would that, how would business property be affected if this measure went through?
I'll take that one. I'm the one who, they will likely increase. Business property taxes will likely increase.
Because the assessment rate would stay at 29, and as the assessed value went up, then those taxes would increase accordingly, but with the assessed value, not with the assessment rate. Is that right, Commissioner? I believe.
Well, it's the fact that in order for us to stabilize the revenues for residential, we have have to increase the mills.
Right.
Right now, we're approximately 15 mills. If this passes, it will go to approximately 18 mills. We don't know for sure, but that's just something to think about. So businesses pay 29%, as you have already stated, and they would end up paying 18 mills on the 29% instead of the 15 mills. So that is actually, yeah, that is a not so good part of this.
Any
If I could
other
add to that
comment
just real
on
quickly,
that?
one, that is true for the local questions. And we've always been very honest about that and will continue to be. But if the statewide question passes, that does not happen. The commercial property owners, if the statewide question passes and Gallagher is repealed, the commercial property owners will not face those higher mills. That is the mechanism for the local governments to de-Gallagherize. So I would just say if you're a commercial property owner, you may really, really want to see the state question pass.
So just a little bit more on that. So we talked about the idea of a floating mill levy before. So the mill levy would float up to make sure that the residential revenue was the same. What we're explaining here is the issue that there's no way to do that just for the residential and not commercial. So when that mill levy floated up to compensate for the Gallagher reset, then it would in fact increase the taxes on the commercial side as well. There's no way to prevent that because we can't have separate mill levies for different categories.
That's correct, Senator Rankin. That's correct.
Yeah.
Yep, that's correct.
So the question was, did somebody say that would be $68 per 100,000 on commercial property? Did somebody say that?
That was me, and it's $68 for a $400,000 property, about $17 per 100,000 in assessed value.
For a residential property.
But it would be 4 times that for commercial, roughly. Mm-hmm.
That's true. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So we have a question. How often does the Gallagher rate change or adjust? Every 2 years we reassess at the state level, and the assessment formula is statewide. And so it's done every 2 years. So we are, let's see, I don't see another question. So send those questions. That might be the last question. Well, I think this has been an interesting discussion, good questions coming out of it. I think we all have a lot of work to do to educate the public on this issue. And we need to, I mean, from my point of view, we probably ought to really work on simplifying the message, because this is, every time I do this, you know, we're going to get caught up in the issue. It's hard to explain, but let's just think about the impact that will happen on our fire districts, library district, county school districts, if we don't do one or the other. I have no faith in the state of Colorado passing this initiative because it's largely a rural impact. So, I mean, I would encourage, I really like what you're doing, is to, you know, prepare for the contingency by running your own measures. I think we really should do that. I'm going to be encouraging every county and every district to do the same if they aren't already. It's getting kind of late. So, yeah, I just, the state budget is down, you know, our forecast is that we're going to be down 25% in the year we're currently in. We cut $3.3 billion out of the state spending. If we have to try to help the counties and backfill schools, there is no resource to do that. So we have to, at the county level, and in school level, we have to pass every measure we can to take charge of this situation, to take our destiny in our own hands. And this is a absolutely perfect approach for the county to not depend on the state to solve our problems.
Thank you very much, Senator Rankin. Yeah, we like the be local control in Grand County, so we're not going to depend on the state. But thank you, Senator Rankin, and thank you for the sheriff for making a video. Thank you to my fellow commissioners. Thank you to Turn Court for putting this together. This video is being recorded and will be available on the county website for future people to see. And that 5-minute Gallagher explanation video is also going to be on the county website for folks to see. And we're at the end of our hour, and I just want to thank our attendees for tuning in. And I think that concludes the first ever Grand County Town Hall. Thank you, everybody.